you ever been in that situation where you really want to ace a subject? You pull the all-nighters, you whip out your highlighters, burn the midnight oil, but then it's the day of the test, you write it, and you end up getting a D or even a C. Basically something really average that did not give what needed to be gave to the highest of giving in relation to what you actually did. And people who didn't do as much as you did end up getting the A's and the B's. Now, I had this exact same situation right when I finished high school. I was preparing for my first A-level exams, so I did everything that conventional wisdom taught me to do. I burned the midnight oil to the extent where I was averaging only 4 hours of sleep every night. I spent almost all of my waking moments studying. I literally had zero to no social life, only for me to eventually write the exam and end up with something ridiculously average, and that hurt. Now, that made me really sad for a while. I began to second guess myself. Am I dumb? And I did what every average 21st century teenager would do when posed with a really important existential question. I went straight to Google. I went through every single piece of information I could find on how do I get smart? What kind of foods do you need to get smart? I went down the rabbit hole, and while in my state of research, I stumbled upon some really conflicting ideas that when I eventually tested it out, I realized my whole life had been a lie. Just kidding though, just kidding. But I actually did realize that a lot of things that we consider conventional wisdom could actually be one of the main things holding you back. And in this video, I'll be sharing with you the 7 worst productivity advice that we're not productive at all. Now, the first worst productivity advice on this list is the advice that you should neglect your sleep. You might actually fall into this logic of thinking, I have 24 hours in a day and I sleep for 8 hours, so I'm left with 16 hours. And if you factor in taking your bath, eating, the normal day-to-day, you could actually be eventually left with 12 to 10 hours of utilizable focus time to actually study. And you may fall under the impression that, okay, if I were to sacrifice just 2 hours or 3 hours of my 8 hours and sleep for 5, I can use those 3 hours to add it to my focus time and end up with something like 13 to like 15 utilizable hours to actually study. You may actually feel it's common sense. The more time you have to study, the more you are actually going to get done. Wrong. Now, why this advice is so counterintuitive is because sleeping is actually what helps you to remember the stuff you read in the first place. To be more specific, the REM phase of your sleeping cycle, that's what actually determines your consolidation of your memories. And that usually occurs like close to when you're about to wake up, when you actually work with a decent 8-hour to 7-hour sleep cycle. And now, here you are, literally scraping away the most important part that is vital to your ability to remember stuff. And also, like, this sleep thing, yeah, it's a whole can of worms. And another reason why this is actually really counterintuitive is because when you do not have enough sleep, you actually get what is called brain fog. Have you ever had a situation where you wake up in the morning and you feel like really tired to the point that your brain just feels woozy, like it's not alert, it's really sluggish. It takes time for you to really assimilate stuff, or you're slower than you normally would be. If you've ever had that before, that's the classic case of brain fog, and your ability to actually assimilate the things you're actually reading is usually cut down by like 30 to 50% because of lack of sleep. Also, when you are running on a sleep deficit, you actually have a higher probability or a higher chance of getting burnt out. And if you're really interested in this topic of burnout, I made a video about it, why you're unhappy in college. It's going to really help you if you really want to go that route. Now, the second worst productivity advice is the advice that everything is important for an exam. Sometimes when we are preparing for an exam, we can fall into the delusion that every single thing that is in the textbook is what's going to be asked for that exam. But there's a really interesting phenomenon that completely counteracts this logic, and that's called the 80-20 rule. Now, the 80-20 rule states that 80% of the results come from 20% of the inputs. Now, if we were to translate this into your studies, that will automatically mean 20% of the material you're studying will account for 80% of the questions that's going to be asked. Contrary to conventional wisdom, your job is to find that 20% of topics that are really important and dump the 80%. Yeah. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but like if you really go deep into this, like honestly, it's going to save you a lot of time and you get to focus on high yield areas that would actually lead to more results instead of you spending your energies on the 80% that only lead to 20% of the results or the marks that you're looking for. Now, another counterintuitive advice is just work and don't focus on the specifics. Now, what do I mean? This is basically when you are just working, but you have no way to actually measure your progress. Now, this would manifest itself in a classical case like this. Now, let's say I want to study for an exam, and my study strategy is just to open my books and read. Now, on the surface, that might actually look like, oh wow, that's the right thing to do, but that's actually a not so optimal way to go about it. Now, the specifics in which I mean is when you actually do decide to work, do you actually set milestones? There's something called Parkinson's law. Now, this law states that work expands to fill the time allotted to it. If I decide to read for an exam and I have no particular deadline on when I want to finish a particular topic or the list of topics, that work will expand to an empty void because there's no specific deadline that I have set to actually get that work done. So I may actually never end up finishing the topics I want to get done before the exam. Another counterintuitive advice is don't take breaks. Now, sometimes we can be so overzealous that we fail to actually sit down and recharge. Now, why is this important? This is because when we do not actually take our time, like having a day off to actually recharge and relax and just enjoy life for what it is, we can actually inadvertently lead ourselves to burnout. Because when you do not actually give yourself space to basically decompress, you can literally implode, because burnout is essentially when you are completely and totally done with work or wanting to study and you just want to just lie down on your bed and just stay like that. If you eventually get in that state, it's actually going to take you a whole lot longer before you can actually get back to your initial level of productivity. So instead of getting to that point, it's better to basically reward yourself intermittently with little breaks. Then you can easily recharge yourself so you do not fall into the state of having a completely empty battery that will take a whole lot longer to recharge again. Now, there's a saying that he who fails to plan plans to fail. Now, this is actually from experience, yeah? Different exams have different modes of operation. If, let's say, I want to write the USMLE and I'm fresh from medical school and I am using the mindset of my medical school of preparing for an exam and trying to compare it with an external exam body, but that may be completely counterintuitive, where you actually need to go through past questions and go through a lot. Sometimes even going through your past quizzes might be even more important than actually reading the textbook. And if you do not really take your time to understand the terrain in which you are operating in, that's what just winging it means. Just winging it does not really lead to the best outcomes. Now, another worst productivity advice that I've actually experienced is the advice that you should just focus on yourself. On the surface, this might sound like, how is this a bad productivity advice? Just focus on yourself. But where it gets to the point where you are completely focused on yourself and you do not really have the time to help anyone else, if you are in the position to actually help someone by sharing knowledge or sharing information, you actually tend to hoard it to yourself. Honestly, you are quite literally shooting yourself in the foot. Because what I've noticed is that the times that I decide to hoard information, I'm actually doing myself a disservice. Because the thing is that no man is an island. The next guy is going to 8 or 9 out of 10 times know something that I don't. And if I'm constantly hoarding information and not sharing, I am not able to receive. Because you have to give first before you can receive. And when you do not share things you know with other people, they also will not share the things that they know to you. And honestly, 2 heads will always be better than one. And when you are not in a collaborative state by helping others and focusing on other people, and you are only in a selfish state by only focusing on yourself, that is not exactly, in my experience, the best way to actually be productive in anything or in any exam even. Now, another really bad productivity advice is that you should always respond to your messages and you should always be on top of everything, because you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe somebody's going to send you something. So that's actually a bad productivity advice, because the thing is that if you allow your phone to always be active while you are studying or doing something that is really high leverage, that phone is going to be a distraction. And there's actually something called the context switching penalty. Now, let's say you are on your book studying and you get a notification from your classmate or something, and you switch to your phone to respond to that message and go back to your book. Now, that process of switching your mental context from studying to actually replying to a message and then going back to studying, there's actually going to be a penalty for that. And that penalty manifests itself with when you actually do go back to studying, you will not continue studying with the initial level of focus that you initially had before the message. And for you to get back to that initial level of focus, you actually might spend like 15 to 30 minutes just getting into that flow state of studying. You may actually spend more time on the page than you initially would before you were actually distracted in the first place. And guys, if you like this video, I think you're going to love a video about how you can make your good habits stick. And like always, guys, remember to always keep it real.